For the next couple of weeks, I'll be focusing on the sacrament of marriage, its foundation in natural law, its inseparable twofold purpose, and how God raised this natural God-given gift to the dignity of a sacrament. Tonight, I'll be covering the roots of the crisis in marriage that led to the disastrous decision by the Supreme Court in 2015 to legally recognize marriage between same-sex couples. Now, marriage, as well as so many other things passed on to us by our country's Christian heritage, has been under attack for more than a generation. Let me paraphrase a statement made several years ago by the U.S. bishops on the importance of marriage to a healthy society. The well-being of society itself requires that marriage be promoted and protected. Serious threats to marriage, however, have raised unprecedented challenges to the Church and to the nation by ignoring marriage's fundamental meaning and purpose. Be that as it may, as with the fight for the culture of life, so too for marriage. By God's grace, after decades of prayer and work by millions of Christians and other men and women of goodwill, Roe versus Wade was overturned. And while there's still much left to do to transform our culture of death into a culture of life, the overturning of Roe versus Wade will save literally millions of lives in the years to come. And the same is true for marriage. God's grace can and will return marriage to what He intended it to be. That's why we should continue praying for a return to marriage as God intended and work toward that end just as fervently as we do for life. But to step back a bit, I think it's vitally important to understand how we got to this point, how we got here. Why has the understanding of marriage, which throughout human history has been universally recognized as between man and woman, been called into question? How did we get here? The reason can be stated pretty succinctly. We got here because as a society, as a culture, we have ignored natural law. We have ignored natural law. Now, natural law sounds intimidating, but it's a term that simply means how things work. God made everything that exists with a particular nature, and what He created necessarily acts according to the nature it received to achieve the good for which God intended. This applies to the material, physical realm as well as the moral realm. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says of natural law with respect to man that it forms the basis of his fundamental rights and duties and is immutable, permanent throughout history. In other words, the fundamental moral law cannot change. In the physical realm, it's quite easy to understand natural law, and we see it in operation. For example, the nature of physical objects with mass is that they are attracted to one another. We call that gravity. That's why when you throw a rock into the air, it falls to the ground. A bird's nature is to fly, a fish's to swim. Put gas in a gas tank and the car will run. Put sand in there and it won't. In the physical realm, things behave according to laws, if you will, that God put into their nature. The same thing holds for you and me. Humans have been given a particular nature that we are to abide by, but with a twist. In the physical realm, we're much like rocks with respect to gravity. We don't have much choice. If we walk off a cliff, we'll fall. The twist comes when we consider free will, which is another of God's gifts. Free will, which is an integral part of human nature, enables us to choose whether we will act in accordance with our nature. This is the basis of morality, or how we ought to behave. Morality, that is, what we should do, is determined by our human nature and discoverable by reason, which forms the basis of our conscience. We're bound to always act in accordance with our nature. When we choose evil, however, we're acting against our nature. The essence of a moral human act, that is, one that is in accordance with our nature, is one in which a person freely chooses the good. Let me repeat that. A moral human act is one in which a person freely chooses the good. Notice how this definition implicitly assumes a good and evil, which we inherently know due to our nature or discover using reason. But it is this very definition that's the point of departure for modern society and the genesis of the current crisis in marriage and a legion of other societal crises we face. We're seeing today the culmination of a centuries-long effort to drop the last two words from the definition of what constitutes a moral human act. Instead of a moral human act being one in which a person freely chooses the good, our culture wants that to be a moral act is one in which a person freely chooses. Do you see the difference? It no longer matters what we choose, just that we have chosen. Our culture now maintains that the very act of choosing makes our choice, whatsoever it may be, good. And modern culture has gone even further in that it feels emboldened to decide what human nature itself is. Our culture has asserted that we get to decide who we are, what we can be, what we can do, and when we can do it, natural law and God Himself notwithstanding. The 1992 Supreme Court opinion of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which I have repeated scornfully as much as I possibly could many times, captures the mentality of this society we live in perfectly. It's one of the most arrogant, inane, and dangerous opinions ever. The opinion reads, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, one's own concept of meaning, one's own concept of the universe, and one's own concept of the mystery of human life," unquote. Hitler would have welcomed the worldwide acceptance of this kind of liberty. His concept of the universe, his definition of reality, was one in which there were no Jews, Catholics, homosexuals, or anyone else he deemed disabled or unfit. Racists and bigots likewise can agree to such a concept of liberty. Their notion of the mystery of human life, their concept of reality, is one that denies the humanity of those they choose to hate. The current gender confusion our society is plagued with finds justification in this opinion as well. Now, clearly, mankind has grappled with sin since Adam and Eve. The difference today is that while in the past there has been a general recognition, acceptance, or at least a begrudging acknowledgement of some objective basis for determining what good and evil is. Today, we're on the verge of declaring every individual to be their own objective standard, and thereby setting the stage for more societal clashes like we see today, for anarchy in the future, and if left unchecked, an entirely predictable descent into despotism, whereby the strongest declare what is good and what is evil. Might makes right. Now, given our society's sorry moral state, we might be tempted to throw in the towel and hunker down and adopt a me and Jesus mentality. But that's not how our Lord deals with society or us, is it? Instead of abandoning us to our fate when we sin, he always tries to get us to return to him. Our Lord never gives up on us, and so we must never give up either. And this is the reason why I love the Old Testament story of Queen Esther so much. You'll remember that Esther was a Jewess who became the queen of Persia during the Jewish exile. Queen Esther single-handedly saved her people from utter destruction at the hands of a powerful government official who had decided to slaughter the Jews because they honored God above all earthly powers. To save her people, however, Esther had to appear before the king unannounced, which, according to Persian law, was punishable by death. While contemplating whether to go through with this, Esther's cousin Mordecai said to her, "Esther, who knows but that it was for a time like this that God put you here to save your people from destruction?" And today we need to take Mordecai's words as our own. Who knows but that God put us here in this society at this time to be a holy witness to the truth, that we might save those he loves from destruction. These are hard truths, but nevertheless ones that need to be respectfully and lovingly brought to our culture to show them that God's ways are the best ways. For our culture has lost its way, and our country desperately needs you and I, through our Lord Jesus Christ, to show them the way back. Next week, I'll be covering the consequences of denying natural law with respect to marriage. But in the meantime, let's ask the Blessed Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph to intercede with their Son and our Lord, that we might have the courage, the grace, and the strength to be Christ to the world, to be loving witnesses to the truth of what marriage truly is.